But if your position is being cheered by Vladimir Putin, it's time to reconsider your position. Now, I can't see into the future, but there are no guarantees that Ukraine will defeat Russia. But that does not mean that we should stand back and let Putin have his way with Europe. What sending weapons to Ukraine does do is help discourage further Russian and Chinese invasions, which could draw us in. It helps preserve NATO. It allows America to remain the leader of the free world. And it shows that we honor our word to our friends and allies. Lech Walesa, the first democratically elected president of Poland since 1926, and someone I've been fortunate enough to meet with, recently wrote to all the United States senators. He said this, quote, "You're obliged to assure a peaceful future for your children. Our grandchildren will never forgive us if we fail to stop Russia now. If the U.S. does not lead, nobody will." End of quote. Couldn't agree more. Helping a free people defend their freedom is simply the right thing to do.
Well, Russia at the present time is at a crossroads. It is often said that the Cold War is over and that the West has won it. That's only half true, because what has happened is that the communists have been defeated, but the ideas of freedom now are on trial. If they don't work, there will be a reversion to not communism, which has failed, but what I call a new despotism, which would pose a mortal danger to the rest of the world, because it would be infected with the virus of Russian imperialism, which of course has been a characteristic of Russian foreign policy for centuries. We begin with that. Therefore, the West has, the United States has, all those who want peace and freedom in the world, a great stake in freedom succeeding in Russia. If it succeeds, it will be an example for others to follow. It will be an example for China, for example, to follow, for the other communist states, the few that remain. If it fails, it means that the hardliners in China will get a new life. They will say, it failed there, there's no reason for us to turn to democracy. That's part of what is at stake here.
Well, good morning and welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me this morning. Glad to have you here. We've got a lot of interesting things going on, and I hope you appreciated what you just heard from both Mitt Romney and from Richard Nixon that I kind of scrounged up last night, because a couple of these kind of came across my feed, and I had to go back and find them again. I thought both messages were rather profound, and as much shade as we tend to shine on, shade that we give to Richard Nixon, he was right about Russia. And it looks like China has been watching what Russia's been up to, and it looks like we're going to be dealing with that situation for quite some time. Considering if they can, since Russia has managed to not take on freedom as its cause, China's saying, why should I mess with it? It's not a pretty picture out there. But let's go ahead and get started here. I see Douglas is here, and Lucille is here, and Giannis of Avalon is here, and Ozzy. Ozzy, I answered your question in the comments there. I've not used the Andrew Perpetua map yet in a video, though I have seen it a few times. I'll take another look at it so we can see if we can get some more information on that. And Giannis, thank you very much for the commentary on the clips. Some of these are really, really good, and I do think they're kind of important to see happen. Kind of see how our in our history, our politicians kind of had a pretty good idea what was going on. But let's go ahead and move over to kind of some interesting information that's coming out of Russia right now. And this is very much relevant to the clip there where that Richard Nixon was doing, the one where he spoke about how Russia would be, if Russia was fighting for freedom, then China would see it, and the opposite would be true. They've gone into this kind of totalitarian, this despotism. But interestingly enough, they are 100% behind the Chinese now, because it looks like the Chinese are the rising power. Let's go ahead and see what I mean by that. The governor of the Amur region in Russia has started recording his addresses in Chinese. That'll be Governor Vasily Orlov on the Easter New Year. He told the Chinese about the strengthening of cooperation between Russia and China, and also noted the rapprochement between Blagoveshchensk and Haya, which are located on opposite banks of the Amur River. He said, "We are so close that when music is played on the embankment of the Chinese city of Haya, it can be heard in the regional capital." So we're already looking at the Russians potentially taking on the language of Chinese in their foreign communications. Now, understand how big this is. When Russia was the big bad on the block, they insisted that all their satellite states and the foreign people that actually they'd interact with on a regular basis, those that were in their direct sphere of influence, were to communicate in Russian only. And there was, I don't remember which one it was, but another country that used to be in the Russian sphere of influence had a bunch of Russian politicians in there for a meeting. And the president of the country spoke in his own native tongue, causing the Russians to have to scramble to get their translator earbuds and all that kind of stuff and get everything put together. The truth is that Russia is finding out that being the big bad in the past does not make you the big bad today. And therefore, these countries are telling them that they're not going to be dealing with the Russians on the same terms they used to. Chinese, on the other hand, if Russia's starting to deal with the Chinese in Chinese, that's a big change. They're realizing who the big brother is in their partnership right now. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the big news of the morning, which is that another Russian landing ship has been sent to the bottom of the Black Sea. Now, this came in overnight. I kind of took a fast glance at it, and initially I was like, well, I don't have confirmation. I've now got it from multiple sources. Let's go ahead and take a look at this video right here of the incident. Now, I've definitely got to keep this muted because it has some seriously over-copyrighted music on here. I'm going to go ahead and dip forward a bit, kind of get to the meat of it. A lot of this video is just this bouncy footage showing the drones approaching the ship and a couple of close impacts and things like that. The real key part of this is going to be towards the end, which it took me a little bit to realize, and I'll try and get a pause on the exact frame here so we can see what I'm talking about. Here's this drone's going in. It's already at a spot. Looks like it's already taken some fire. Then, of course, it cuts to another drone that's kind of watching, and you can see the explosion there. It's clear this ship took it pretty hard. But there's a specific scene I want to get, if I can get to it. Bear with me just a moment here. Okay, let's see. Back up a touch, right? What you're seeing here is a ship heeling over to port. It is preparing to sink, and it is literally rolled over far enough that some of the deck is ending up in the Black Sea. The ship is going down. The profile has changed so much. The superstructure here is so much lower compared to what it was early in the video, even from this farther distance. This ship rolled over to port and sank. And I believe that is confirmed, especially since the Ukrainian GUR actually intercepted some of the pilot conversations that went to the location, stating that they see debris and an oily slick. These are the signs of a ship having gone down. They don't know the exact number of military personnel that have passed away. It's presumed to be all hands or at least close to it. So that's the another one of Russia's Black Sea fleet hitting the bottom of the sea. Quite the change from just early in this war when the Russians had full reign over the Black Sea. Now they don't. Also puts you to question about the viability of modern large capital ships. especially when you look at it through this perspective. They're in a relatively trapped area in relatively calm seas. The Black Sea is relatively calm. And so it's easy for them to find, intercept, and use these small speedboat-sized boats actually, to intercept and destroy these large landing ships. So what are going to be the counters that are going to have to be implemented in order to watch for these drones? Thermal imagers at lookout stations? Are we looking at more use of specialized radars? I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see what the counters eventually become when the U.S. realizes that their own ships are going to be vulnerable to this type of thing. Be interesting to see, but maybe they're not, and I just don't know. Interesting bit of information from Al Jazeera coming to us from Crimean Wind, who gave us a summary of this article from them. The Russian Federation's plan of 32,000 UAVs per year seems modest compared to Ukraine's production plans. Unable to match Ukraine in terms of production volumes, the Russian Federation paid Iran $1.75 billion for 6,000 of these Shahed drones. Ukraine is one of the few countries that broke off from the USSR when it fell, that retained this type of aircraft engine manufacturing industry. So they've got experience making engines large and small for the purposes of going into aircraft, which gives them a huge advantage when it comes to drone production in this regard, because these aren't just the little quadcopter drones. These aren't just hobbyist drones. We're talking miniature aircraft, basically small RC type aircraft that are being used to deliver payloads over 1,000 kilometers away. The knowledge could be used to restore the production of missiles or drones. It doesn't come out of nowhere, meaning that Ukraine's got the knowledge to do it. For strikes on Crimea with ballistics, Ukraine probably used its own developments, so any of the ballistic missiles we're seeing hit Crimea at this point are likely going to be mostly Ukraine's own equipment. They're still using the Scalp and the Storm Shadow missiles, absolutely. So we're seeing a lot more of domestic developments of ballistic and missile technology coming out of Ukraine these days. We've got Ukraine becoming an innovator in the topic. These are the only real tool that Ukraine has available to break out of the stalemate type situation, with no ability to take on the air component beyond its air defense missiles. Ukraine's having to rely on these drones to make the big difference on the battlefield. So this is a lot of interesting information about drones. All right, let's take a pause here. Flip over to here. Ozzy asks, I wonder what valuable cargo the landing ship was carrying. Do we know if it was an outward voyage loaded with freight or Sevastopol, or empty on a return journey? I do not know on either aspect. I believe there were reports that there was a secondary explosion, which would indicate a significant amount of ammunition aboard. That said, these landing ships are armed, so therefore they will be carrying they will have a magazine with armaments inside. It does have a deck gun and amongst other defenses and abilities. So we don't know exactly what cargo was on board, but either way, the ship is no longer there to deliver it. Hi, Jerry. Welcome aboard. Glad to have you here, and glad to have everybody here this morning. Let's go ahead and move on to the news out of Ukraine. There's not a ton of it this morning, so let's go ahead and get what we can. And some of it's a little bit more sobering than others. Jason J. Smart reports that there are a bunch of ambulances waiting in Kyiv for injured Ukrainian soldiers. When a friend from Poland visited, he said, have you noticed how many guys in Kyiv don't have legs? And he hadn't noticed. He'd been there. He'd been amongst them so much that he hadn't noticed that so many men were missing limbs from this war in Ukraine. There's those who are opposed to this war claim that people are just partying in Kyiv, that they're just doing all kinds of goofing off and things are just perfectly normal. Well, it's perfectly normal if you're perfectly normal involves people with no legs, missing arms, and tremendous battlefield wounds. Russia attacked Kiev itself with more of their Zircon hypersonic cruise missiles. This is the first time actually striking Kiev itself. Previously, they've hit Kharkiv and possibly Odessa. This is from February 7th, with several pieces of the debris bearing the relevant inscriptions, including bolts on the steering mechanisms marked with the number 26, which is a feature of the Zircon missile. So overall, it appears that Russia's busting out anything they've got left and bringing in their latest hardware that they would normally reserve for a near-peer conflict. Let's go ahead and move on to a bit of Russian disinformation here. Now, I'm sorry that some of these tabs have been sitting here overnight, so let's see if we can get everything ready here. Russian propagandists, the armed forces of Ukraine state, have launched a disinformation campaign about an alleged loss of defense forces of Ukraine in Seladov of Donetsk. Now, they claim this is a Russian disinformation operation or an information psyop. The overall situation, when you look at it from the Russian side, is they claim that they have killed 1,500 people, 1,500 soldiers at a training ground near Donetsk. So 1,500 people, they say, in fact, up from, let me see. Yeah, 1,500 people, the Russians are saying, after shelling a location in Donetsk. So they're claiming this 1,500 people, but the results that Ukraine is actually reporting are 2 apartment buildings hit and a car and I believe a light truck with no injured or dead, although another report said there were about 2 people that were injured in the attack. General Tarnovsky has issued a statement dismissing this Russian disinformation about these losses, and he says it's really intended to divert attention from Russia's significant losses. The truth is that Russia's been losing a lot of people in this direction in their meat wave attacks, effectively. And so there may be a significant reason to try and bloody Ukraine's nose on as much as they can so they can give their own troops a little bit of a morale boost. I'm Paul, glad to have you here, and glad again, thank you to everybody for being here today. We're going to go ahead and move into the news out of Russia today. Ukraine's Ministry of Intelligence reported that elements of Lebanese Hezbollah and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps are training Russian drone operators at Sharyat Air Base in Syria. This indicates that Russia's finding that they're not able to use their own drone training facilities, and they may not have the necessary technical expertise to actually train drone operators. It's not uncommon for Russia to bring their trainers to the front and have them actually fighting on the front, thus making them vulnerable to enemy attack, as in Ukrainian attack, that have been taking them off the battlefield. If that's the case, then having their drone operators trained elsewhere may be a necessary and almost vital part of the war from Russia's standpoint. Yesterday's defense intelligence update from the UK states that Russia is proposing draft legislation to raise the age of military contract personnel, including those recruited before June 2023, to age 65 and age 70 for officers. This would substantially raise the current age limit of 51 for non-officers and would likely extend the contract length. The pre-war life expectancy of Russian males was 64.2 years, according to world data. Therefore, this measure confers on these service personnel, in effect, a lifetime contract. Although this measure will likely alleviate the need for additional mobilization, increasing the number of personnel aged over 51 is highly unlikely to increase Russia's combat effectiveness, particularly in kinetic assaults. To a certain extent, this is an old man's war. Ukraine is already working, I think it's a 45-year-old average age for their military in this operation. And Russia has been throwing everything they can at it, so there's no telling what their average age is. But they're everything from young kids to old guys and people out of prison. They're not exactly throwing their best and brightest into those meat waves after all. This does not, however, spare any of the young kids either, because this is the biggest land war we've seen in Europe since World War II itself. And I expect by the end of this, we're going to see a lot more people of all ages perishing on the battlefield. Behind Putin's war on Ukraine is the neo-imperial goal that many Russian elites share: to make Russia great again by reversing the results of the collapse of the Soviet Union, according to a guest op-ed by Germany's Joschka Fischer, who's the foreign minister of Germany. And this appears to be the entire goal. This is about salving Russian pride. In the end, there is no military need for this. There is no objective being carried out that has any kind of validity beyond Russia not wanting to get their imperial ambitions out of the way. They're already a massive country. They already have more territory than they know what to do with. They have 150 million people in Russia and a huge country to put them in. If they would dedicate half this energy into developing their own natural resources and their own wealth, they could easily become the richest nation in the world, surpassing China, surpassing the U.S. Instead, they're blowing away the fruit of their country, the future of their country, in a war in Ukraine. So that is the situation there. And it really does seem, and we've seen it from other people saying that that Russia has imperialist goals. They have this despotism at their very core. And their brief opportunity to embrace freedom was left behind. Maybe it'll come back again. I just don't know. Ozzy says, Russia, if I've told you once, I have told you 1,000,000 times. Stop exaggerating. So true. There's nothing about that Russia will do more than just exaggerate. And Paul says, Russia never was great. The best part of the Soviet Union was the countries forced to be under Russia in the Soviet Union. Look at the success of the old Eastern Bloc post-Soviet Union. And that is absolutely true. Now, old Tucker Carlson came back from Moscow saying it was such a clean and beautiful city, and so was St. Petersburg. He didn't look at the rest of the country, many of places that don't have indoor plumbing or washing machines or toilets. So he's looking at this tiny sliver of the elites and saying this represents the country as a whole. But if you look at Ukraine was starting to actually prosper without Russia being under their influence. They were doing real reforms. They were coming to a Western style of country. Russian soldiers who are from the backcountry of Russia come to Ukraine and they see these amazing homes that the average person lives in that are just like a Western home that you might live in the United States or anywhere else, with modern conveniences, and they're amazed and they're horrified that they don't have them themselves, and so they usually destroy them. So truly, those that were under the Soviet rule have found ways to prosper without them, and going back in under the Russian rule will mean they will no longer be able to prosper. Apologize, I've got an itchy nose today. I don't know if it might be allergies or something today, but if I rub my nose a few more times, it's probably because it's itching a little bit. So, talking about Starlink for a moment, we mentioned the other day that there were signs of it showing up on the battlefield. There's actually been websites dedicated to selling these, dedicated to selling Starlink terminals for the special military operation use. The Arabs, they say, the Russian soldiers say, supply us with everything. These two Russian soldiers were discussing how Russia is getting this communications equipment, including the Starlink terminals, through Arab countries for use in the war with Ukraine. Old Musk is saying there's no evidence of him showing up, but obviously there is. Lucille says, agree with you, Paul. Russia was never great as in good, but it was a power for forcing unwilling countries into bondage. I'm astonished how easily some Americans have been duped by them. Yeah, too true. Very much too true. And there are reasons for that I don't think any of us can really get into in too much detail. But overall, we've got a situation where there are many politicians who have supped at the cup of the ruble, and they are now being demanded to provide services for those particular donations. I'm not going to go into naming names or placing anything like that, because I would prefer to have all of my ducks in a row and all of my evidence together before detailing that information. But overall, it's clear that there are some who have decided that the mighty ruble is worth the sacrifice of their oaths to their country. But I'm not going to go into that further, because that's U.S. politics, not Russian politics, despite the relationship. Let's go ahead and get back to the news out of Russia. Something was burning on the MiG plant in Moscow. They say that a roof of a basically refurbished workshop or shed or outbuilding was on fire, and they managed to put it out. Now, they say that this building was located on the territory of the MiG plant, but it had been sold for development. Sure, I'll let them come to that one if they would like to. There was a fire at Saki Airfield in Novofedorovka. That's over in Crimea. There is a parking lot for military equipment and a radar site nearby. There's no report on damages for this, but interesting to see that once again we've got more things like this going on in Crimea. Once again, I want to remind you that if somebody tells you who they are, it's best to pay attention and believe them. When Anton Hershchenko spoke about the aggressive, cruel, evil nature of the Russian people, looking at some of his stuff, he went ahead. This propagandist saw it, read his comments, and he said, "Russia is an empire, and Russia expands its borders. That's its basic principle." So they will not stop, as Anton Hershchenko states. So they're just admitting outright that this is who they are. This is what they do. They're imperialists and despots. There was a powerful fire in the area of the Gazprom Nafta refinery. No known causes at this point, but it seems like Ukraine's been targeting a lot of this infrastructure. Therefore, probably a likely drone strike, though it could also be sabotage or just plain Russia being Russia. And finally, on the Russia front, Russian Major General Ivan Spartak Popov will be formally fired by the end of the month. He is currently under an unofficial house arrest in Moscow. There could be criminal charges against him. The details of this is that he actually criticized the military leadership back during Yevgeny Prigozhin's little mutiny, and they sent him off to someplace else, I think Syria, going from memory. Yeah, he was in Syria, where he was exiled and stripped of his command. And now they've brought him back rather suddenly. So my guess is he's going to face some serious charges. And that's the news out of Russia. So by the way, I've been trying a few new things with this stream. Let me know what you think of them. I've got a couple of cameras. I'm working to kind of maneuver between them a little bit, which as a one-man show is a little bit more of a challenge sometimes. And I do appreciate all of your comments this morning. It seems like you guys are super active this morning, and I appreciate that. It helps make a big difference in helping us to understand what's going on. Let's see, reading on some more comments here. Paul says, those that want to be duped are always easily duped. And Douglas says, my understanding is that a half a dozen land access routes to Russia are all west of Russia. These access points are critical for Russian defense. So a little bit of context for everything going on. We'll go ahead and move over to the international front. That is, if I can, apparently some of my information has disappeared overnight. Love that. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. The Estonian Prime Minister, Kaja Kallas, was among foreigners on Russia's wanted list. They have now issued an unspecified arrest warrant for the Estonian PM. There's no reported reason for it, but it looks like they're doing this with anybody they think is against the Russian Federation. The U.S. Senate has passed the Ukraine aid bill for a $95 billion funding package that includes aid for Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel, and I believe it's the Asia-Pacific region. So overall, we're looking at that bill has passed the Senate. It now goes to the House where, ironically enough, Speaker Mike Johnson, who has said in the past that he thinks that Ukraine should be supported and has changed his position, has said the bill is dead on arrival. Once again, they're tying that aid to a border package, rhetorically, and considering they've already rejected that roundly, then it seems like it's on their heads now at this point in time. We'll be watching that. There are some parliamentary maneuvers that may be taking place, a specific parliamentary process whose name is escaping me right now, where effectively a discharge petition, where effectively they can insist with enough votes, majority of votes, that something be brought to the floor of the House. So the Democrats are trying to convince a few Republicans to switch sides on this and engage in this discharge petition. The other possibility is to call for vacate the speaker chair. And if they do that, the situation in the House is getting ever more tight for the House Republicans. I say that because if you'll recall, not too long ago, the House actually removed New York Republican George Santos from his seat in the New York 3 district. And the runoff election, the special election that elected his replacement has concluded as of last night, and it has elected a Democrat. So the House majority is gradually shrinking. It's not getting any bigger, that's for sure. I kind of already talked about this as well, that Speaker Johnson rejected the Ukraine aid bill already. Austria is now looking to get rid of any dependence they have on Russian gas and trying to get out of any contract for it. We talked about the grain situation. Sorry, there's some background noise going on over here, some thumping around. Nothing to be concerned about, but just timing, as we say. The Polish agriculture minister, which I'm not going to try to pronounce his name because I have not practiced at all, apologized to Ukraine for the incident with the spilled grain, calling such actions not a completely adequate form of protest, but noted that this is often done by farmers in different countries. No, I'm not talking to a cat, Lucille, but that's certainly one possibility around here for sure. The Poles don't have the same relationship with grain that Ukraine does. But it also, I've seen other sources say that this was a Russian-directed attack, something that was meant to strain the relationship between Poland and Ukraine. That apology has now been issued. We'll be watching for that to see what comes of that in the future. Ukraine may seek the easing of the Green Deal requirements at EU talks for their grain. They're saying that we would forego subsidies for agrarian subsidies in exchange for the easing of the bloc's Green Deal requirements. Those would be the global warming slight requirements that they've set up over, and the if they could hit that ease, that would certainly change the picture for what Ukraine has to face on that. So they could get rid of the subsidies, and as long as the bloc will ease their Green Deal requirements. The U.S. will supply Ecuador with an undetermined number of UH-60AL Black Hawk helicopters to replace the Mi-17 helicopters that they have transferred to Ukraine. This is an interesting sideways way to get aid to Ukraine. Where the U.S. already has money to send, assistance to some of these other countries. So we take those helicopters. We say, okay, you give us a few bucks here. Here you go, some nice new helicopters. Now those helicopters are freed up that you can send to Ukraine. It's just a sneaky way to get that done, and an effective one too. We're effectively re-equipping our allies, and they're getting newer equipment for it. They can send their old equipment to Ukraine. Ukraine gets equipment they're already familiar with and can use right off the bat. No training required. Another Russian propaganda network is working its way through French society. They have been working hard through this Pravda dash and then the English code setup. They're all from the same server. They all work the same information, and they have produced thousands upon thousands of fake articles that are very much critical of the war in Ukraine. U.S. sanctions on the Russian oil fleet have started to have an effect. Half of the tankers that used to transport Russian oil have stopped carrying Russian oil for fear of American sanctions. So they're looking at the situation with Russia and the situation with America, and they're deciding which side has the more dollars, and they realize they don't want to give up the American dollars. My heavens, Aussie, they need a few vowels and a pronunciation guide. At least I need the pronunciation guide in order to be able to say the names, because every time I look at it, how I'd pronounce it is nothing like how the name is actually pronounced. So I keep watching that. Ammunition manufacturer Nammo, located in Sweden, has increased production due to the heightened demand caused by the war in Ukraine. They're now up to 5 shifts, 24/7 operation. This will not be sufficient to meet demand. You've already seen Rheinmetall standing up a new ammunition factory. The U.S. has stood up a second ammunition factory in Texas. It's clear that they're going to have to really start setting up more production facilities if they're going to truly equip for a war. And the interesting part, more than anything else, is this has revealed a fundamental weakness in the U.S. and the Western world's preparation for war. The Soviet Union will keep factories sitting there idle for decades upon decades, waiting until they need to produce ammunition. The U.S. will repurpose all that equipment and those buildings. And so when you end up needing to use that equipment in a war, it's no longer there. It's been stored, it's been destroyed, it's been rendered obsolete, not current or used. So the Soviet Union will keep all those factories just sitting there idle if they have to. They'll even produce at a low rate just to keep it going. The West needs to step up its manufacturing capability and sustain it if they're going to expect to fight a near-peer war. That's the international front for today. Let's go ahead and pause for just a moment. I think I need a drink of water. So give me a moment here to get that done. Oh, I put my water bottle way over there. Pardon me for a moment. I should probably set up some hold music or something like that sometime soon. So we saw the first signs of this APKWS or vampire system actually in use in Ukraine. And I didn't know much about it, but the Kiev Post has provided some information on what this is. And it's really fascinating. If you're familiar with military technology, you'll probably already know what a Hydra rocket is. But if you're not, I believe it's a 70-millimeter rocket that's intended for unguided use in the air-to-ground role. Now, they took this unguided rocket, they slapped a guidance kit, some sensoring stuff, and a laser targeting system on it. And now they can actually guide that to an exact target and take it out by firing it from the ground at something using this laser-guided system. Fascinating use of technology. This combination of existing, known, proven equipment being paired with some new technology to make a new weapon system is a wonderful thing that we're seeing here. This can be slapped, just palletized and slapped in a truck. You throw up your sensors and stuff like that, and you go to work. You've got yourself an anti-air system that can be manually guided, laser guided, right onto a target. So really interesting to see this happening. And for kind of military history buffs like me, it's really just fun to see this equipment repurposed into new and exciting roles like this. Let's go ahead and move over to the front lines, and we have got a lot going on here. We'll start off with some the report of this Ukrainian Mi-8 helicopter possibly being shot down. In fact, we know it was shot down north of Robotyne. They say it's Cornet ATGM fire. Other people say they thought the track was too fast. Either way, that's a Ukrainian helicopter shot down on the front lines during active combat operations. That said, it appears that he was pretty high up in the air compared to how they've normally been flying their helicopters. Either way, it's still bad news for Ukraine that one of the helicopters of the duo was shot down. Sorry, I got to keep changing the zoom on here so we can see what's going on. We're starting to see the first evidence of actual use of GLSDB in the field. And the Russian channels have been sharing this video showing what appears to be the tail parts of a exploded GLSDB with a 150-kilometer radius. And just again, this is another one of these combined proven technologies with some new equipment, and you get this interesting new thing of a guided small diameter bomb with the ability to launch it from the ground, put a rocket motor on it, and guide it right there. It's really just fascinating stuff. It's good stuff, and just seeing this technology being repurposed in this new way really is fascinating. Ozzy has asked a question here. I first saw you on another channel whose name I am unable to recall. Would you mind sharing with us what your YouTube journey to date has been? Now, you'll often see me over on the Geopolitics Daily channel, which is currently sitting a little bit idle as the people who run the channel are off at the moment. But you'll also hear my voice occasionally on the Business Basics channel. So we got a lot of exciting things going on, and I'm trying my best to fill in the gaps while things are a little bit quiet at the moment. I want to provide this information, and I'm actually starting to look at maybe some more general news to tack on to the end of these broadcasts, so that it's not just the information about Ukraine, but maybe some of the other hotspots around the world or other major world events that may be coming up. Let me know if you would like to see at least some of that in going forward. Let's move over to the front lines themselves. The biggest situation and the worst one is in Avdiivka. I can just show you real quick on the map. I've got some more details on this in a bit here. We go back a couple of days. You can see here that these lines near Avdiivka, the Russians have been pushing hard. And it's going to be not pretty. But we'll talk about that more in just a moment here. The situation around Krinky looks like it is continuing to get better for Ukraine, because the Ukrainians posted this flag at the top of a water tower, likely put there with a drone, not likely put there with a human being. But they put this flag on this water tower, and the Russians are not able to get to this water tower to take it down. So they've been trying to blow up the water tower with artillery just to knock this flag down. Just absolutely, if nothing else, if this provides no other useful thing, the fact that Russia's investing any effort at all into taking this thing down, it means that is ammunition and time that's not being spent attacking actual Ukrainians on the field. They really need to spend their time looking at the right things instead of things that are just symbolic. Over near Kreminna in the Luhansk region, a Russian field ammunition site was discovered and destroyed. Quite the boom, and quite a large dump apparently because of the size of that boom. Interesting to see that Ukraine is continuing to effectively run this battlefield any way they can. Now, the reports are that they are going to a more defensive posture at this point in time, trying to hold off. Of course, part of that is because apparently we're already back into a Rasputitsa time right now. It was freezing cold. We had a truck frozen into the ground at one point. Now we're looking at mud season again, and it may be a couple of months before active moving action can be taken. Maneuver warfare. There we go. Avdiivka, the Ukrainians have managed to get a little bit of territory here as well. You can see this little blue area right here. Very nice. So the Ukrainians have managed to advance a little bit at Avdiivka, which is near Bakhmut. And Kromova, the Russians have managed to capture some additional territory near Kromova. And this is likely not recent, as in probably a week ago, just reporting the changes in the front lines. You know, Ozzy, you could also have seen me on my gaming channel, which is where I put out gaming content, but I don't think so. And you're more likely to have seen me, considering where you're at here, through my political and news content instead. So I appreciate you following me to where the information is. Let's go ahead and move on to Avdiivka. Ukraine is reinforcing Avdiivka as Russia continues its offensive. We've already had word that they've started bringing in more Western hardware into Avdiivka, including more Bradleys and more equipment, more troops. It appears that Ukraine is intending to fight for every last inch of Avdiivka. The overall situation is pretty rough, though. Russia has been hitting Avdiivka itself with all the bombs and artillery it can. It's clear, more than anything else, that Avdiivka has become Russia's hill to die on. They're investing everything in here because they want to score a win before the March presidential elections. At this rate, it might happen. The real bad news, and that's kind of what the thumbnail today was all about, is that Russia appears to have cut the main supply route connecting the north and south of Avdiivka. They did report that the Russians had entered the coke and chemical plant, but that was entirely false. Overall, though, that still means that anybody who is south of that line in Avdiivka now is going to have real trouble getting supplies. Even those north of there are going to have a supply route that is heavily under fire and likely to be at least cut off or taken in short order, assuming nothing else changes. This is big news and unfortunate for Ukraine. The armed forces also moved towards, they call it the ninth quarter, which kind of makes me laugh, but it's Industrial Avenue, which is their supply route right through here. They've managed to get onto Industrial Avenue, and some other source said, and I have to take this with a grain of salt, Another source said the Ukrainians had pushed them back from Industrial Avenue. But I have not seen that confirmed by any reliable source. So I'm mentioning it only because this is a dynamic situation. And tomorrow I could be sitting here reporting how the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back from this supply route. We'll find out. Now, this is kind of a little bit harder to see. We're just on regular old Google Maps here. I wanted to kind of show, if I could, what the situation looks like at a slightly higher level here. Now, the main supply route is this road right. In fact, let me get a little bit of something I can draw on the screen with here. Okay, the main supply route is right here. This is where Ukrainian forces would be coming in to get into Avdiivka in order to do this. This is a good quality paved road. Not a wonderful one, but still a good quality paved road. But with the Russians having cut this area right here, this means that anybody south of here in Avdiivka is now subject to what they can get through alternate routes, mud tracks, dirt roads, and some of these really are just dirt tracks. If we zoom in fact, I think I'm already, let's go and clear this off here. If we zoom in, you can see all these little tree lines and things have little tiny muddy, rutted roads or tracks that could be used. But this is not good for heavy logistics. These are not good to bring in heavy equipment or anything like that. We're looking at running pickup trucks, or as we call it, mosquito logistics, across these little muddy, rutted roads and hoping that the Russians aren't paying attention with a drone. There are several routes that they could get through this way, but the end result is still an impossible supply chain that when the mud hits, and if it sounds like it already is, that will be impossible to resupply. So there's your context on that. Now, War Gonzo is a Russian source, so as always, take this with a little bit of a grain of salt. But his report generally matches with the other information I have available. The main part of the fighting in Avdiivka continues to develop from three directions: from the side of the sand quarry towards Industrial Avenue, from the southeast to the northwest from the industrial zone into the depths of the private sector, and also from the south to the area of the Zenit position at the former air defense base, where the boiler gradually begins to close. Meaning they're getting their cauldron together. So they've got a lot of these areas they're trying to close in on. They are planning to cut off the lower part of Avdiivka and try to continue with this execution as they do so. This is still a little premature. They've got to close the gap there and actually hold Industrial Avenue and Privokozalny Lane. And they were going to find that this is going to be a difficult place to hold. There's still Ukrainian armed forces close to that position, but it's critically important for the Russians' eastern flank, since its folding will lead to the straightening of the front and increased attacks from the Russian armed forces. If they can straighten out that line there, that means they are not holding quite so much territory. They don't have to dedicate quite so many men to holding that territory around the edges, and they can bring those troops forward to this new straighter line that will be shorter across, easier to defend, and easier to deal with at a lower manpower cost overall. There really is a shortage of roads of life, and it feels like it has become much more difficult for Ukraine to rotate not just between Avdiivka and the Lestochkino-Orlovka section, but also within city blocks. In general, this indicates a problem with command and control system and a growing shortage of people and ammunition. They also point out that heavy equipment can no longer safely move between Avdiivka and Orlovka, and all military cargo of the Ukrainian armed forces again fell on mosquito logistics. So that's the situation in Avdiivka. And it is not looking good overall. Ukraine's either going to have to decide to pull out of there while they still have the opportunity, pull their men out of the cauldron, or they're going to have to invest a huge amount of men and equipment, keeping the Russians out of there. Let's go ahead and move on to the interesting extras. And I've got a few today. This one caught my eye just because I sat here and I wondered. Tom Cruise is dating Elsina Karova, the daughter of the former chief tax officer of Tatarstan. And this 36-year-old socialite, as they say, has been appearing more and more with Tom Cruise. And I wondered, is this one of those Russian operations going on, or is this really something? Then again, I mean, Tom Cruise is famous. So, I mean, if you were a Russian socialite and looking to up your game, scoring Tom Cruise would certainly be a big upgrade. But I don't know. I wonder. I just wonder about it. And no, I'm not going to start doing, that type of culture news where it's like, oh yeah, Taylor Swift was over there kissing Travis Kelce or whatever. I don't care about that stuff. This one caught my eye just because of the Russian connection. Russians think their TOS-1A heavy flamethrower system is a formidable weapon, but Ukrainians know that it explodes amazingly after being hit. So here's a video of just exactly that happening. Quite the explosion when those TOS-1A missiles go off all together at the same time. Absolutely just a huge explosion. Russian drone operators are showing how their equipment works here. They fire it up, launch it, it falls. Kaboom! Yep, the aviation did an awesome job, they say. I thought it was just hilarious. There's going to be incidents like this anywhere when you've got young men, high-tech goods, and things that go boom, all in the same place. And the last interesting item I picked up for today, the first fighter ace since Vietnam has been claimed by Captain Earl Earhart of the U.S. Marine Corps in an AV-8B Harrier II. He has claimed 7 Houthi drone kills over the Red Sea. That'd be 7 air-to-air victories. Now, I don't know if they suspect there is a different class of ace when it comes to shooting down drones, but still, it's interesting to see that we are at a state of war, that once again we're going to be talking about fighter aces in the skies over Europe and the Middle East. And that's everything for today. I'm going to take a brief pause here to go through any of the comments here and see if there's anything on here. No, I'm not going to talk about Scrabble. But looks like I've got some support for potentially expanding my coverage just a little bit to some of the other world events, particularly in this case, as Ozzy says, for anything that was a potential conflict as it might have associated with World War II. Let's see. Ozzy does say Zenit, the nuclear bomb shelter in the furthest southern pocket of Avdiivka, is worth keeping an eye on. It's operationally cut off. A massive Cold War installation. Yes, and the Ukrainians have been doing a lot of work on trying to keep that facility. The Russians had entered a week or so ago, but were then kicked right back out by the Ukrainians. That is a pretty significant facility to lose, though. It would take a tremendous investment to take it back if they lost it. Okay, and that is everything. Once again, thank you for joining me. If you appreciate this type of coverage of the Ukraine war and want to see more, absolutely hit me with that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, though I suspect anybody who's here right now is already a subscriber. Understand that I appreciate every single one of you. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.